But if you want a remote, awesome experience that gets you into a lot of historical aspects of this desert, this is the trail to do. And it's not the Mojave Road.
Hello, friends. I am driving from Texas to Goffs, California, a former railroad town and home of the Mojave Desert Heritage and Cultural Association. And they are putting on an annual event called the Mojave Road Rendezvous that I will be attending. And after that, I will drive the East Mojave Heritage Trail.
The MDHCA, Mojave Desert Heritage and Cultural Association, is a nonprofit that was formed by my dad, Dennis Casebier. We became a nonprofit in 1993 in order to preserve and educate on Mojave Desert history, all the different layers, including the military, the Native American, the homesteaders, the cattle ranching, the railroad, the schoolhouse, mining.
I am standing in front of the El Garces Hotel in downtown Needles, California. This is a former Harvey House and railroad depot on the Santa Fe line, and it's the beginning of the East Mojave Heritage Trail.
You're looking at the finest linen, silver, crystal, in China.
The EMHT is a 750 plus mile guided route through the eastern Mojave Desert. Created in the late 1980s by Dennis Casebier and the Friends of the Mojave Road, it was intended to disperse the growing recreation impact.
There were so many people using the guide, going out on the Mojave Road. Him and the Friends of the Mojave Road felt that there were too many people concentrated on one road. And so they wanted to expand the educational opportunities. That's when they came up with the East Mojave Heritage Trail, which was a 600-mile loop in 4 different segments to spread people out a little bit. Get them off the Mojave Road, get them on other roads, teach them about other areas of the East Mojave.
It's amazing how much of a visionary he was, looking back at history while always looking forward to the future. The trail begins and ends in the city of Needles, California, at the site of the El Garces Hotel. Needles was founded in 1883 when the railroad arrived. Railroad bridges across the Colorado River were built and washed away every few years until the steel cantilever bridge was built in 1889. The El Garces Hotel was built in 1908 after the first Harvey House and station burned down in 1906. With the National Old Trails Road, which generally followed the railroad, Needles became an important supply point. In 1926, much of it was redesignated U.S. Route 66, and Needles remains an important stop for travelers. The Heritage Trail was 660 miles of primarily off-pavement route through the East Mojave Desert, and it was eventually cut in 1994 by creation of wilderness with the Desert Protection Act. About 5 years ago, a man named Billy Creech, with the cooperation of the National Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management, was able to create a workaround to the places where it was closed, and with that, create a, once again, compliant route.
The guidebooks, there's 4 guidebooks, and they got published. The last one was published in 1989. In 1990, Dennis starts getting the rumblings of this Desert Protection Act coming, and he starts realizing what this is going to do, and he starts, working to lobby against it, and it ultimately passes, and it takes way more land than BLM had recommended, and it cut off his route in multiple places and essentially made the guidebooks useless and made the route non-compliant. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought I could remap it, and the reasons for remapping it became pretty obvious to me that you get recreationists back out there, you could get field scientists compliant routes to get deep into the desert. You could help inject conservation resources, so you help with the federal land managers with their mission. And then in 2019, went out and did it, and the remap ended up being 733 miles.
Well, I'm going to be driving the route over the next 2 weeks or so, and I'm going to take you along for the ride.
This is an in-depth trip on the full East Mojave Heritage Trail, covering all 4 segments for a total of 19 trail days and 771 actual trail miles.
We're rising up out of the valley of the Colorado River and heading toward Eagle Pass up ahead. In the beginning, it's just rough road, not real technical. And kind of sandy wash with some rocks thrown in. Higher down to about 23 psi on the truck and 25 psi on the trailer. It's 3:45 in the afternoon, and right now the truck temperature gauge says it's 103 outside. This is looking down the wash that I just came up. From the beginning, we've been traveling on segment 1 and segment 4. Segment 1 outbound and segment 4 inbound. And we're about to reach the intersection where they split from each other, where segment 4 comes in and where segment 1 veers to the right and continues on. There are signs at critical junctions pointing the correct route.
Seems like it happened a lot that old vehicles broke down in the desert and were just abandoned where they stopped.
Good evening. I found a campsite beside the road, and it's after sunset, and it's been a long day, even though I've only been on the trail for a little over 20 miles. It's a good trail. It's rough in places, a lot of sandy washes that have been tracked up fairly deeply, but it's going pretty well. Haven't had any real issues. I climbed one hill that popped open the hatch on the trailer, so I've got to be a little more careful about keeping that closed. I'm gonna make a reheat leftovers dinner. I'm gonna be doing that a lot over the next week or two. Nothing fancy for dinner, and I have been not sleeping very well lately, so I'm gonna go to bed early and hopefully get a good night's sleep for a change. But before I do that, I am going to attempt to photograph the comet. I saw it for the first time last night after sunset, and the first comet I've ever seen. Not a bad week having my first aurora borealis and my first comet in the same week. So I'll catch you in the morning. Dash says 74 degrees, but it feels very cool overnight. Days are gonna still be in the 90s. Overnight lows in the 60s, and this is mid-October. So it'll cool off a little bit more in the coming weeks. Best time to run the trail is probably October to April. Good morning. It's day 2 on the trail. I didn't get very far yesterday because I started late and I only made it about 20 miles. Today, we should have a good distance on the trail. There's not a whole lot of stops, and we will be visiting a few of those. An old power line maintenance camp, the town of Goffs. I'll be returning there because I spent most of the last week there. And visiting an old mine. We've got a lot to see, so let's get going.
This road is a gas pipeline road, maintenance road, which is why it's so long and straight. You can see it out in the distance, miles away, still aligned with where we are right now. In many places, the roads are fronted by wilderness area, and this is one of them. So all of this that we see is wilderness, designated wilderness. And in some places, the road is cherry stemmed through wilderness areas, so you've got it on both sides of the road. But I've stopped here to look at something that I found on satellite photos, and it's actually a remnant of Patton's Desert Training Center from 1942 to 44. And these are tank tracks. Notice how much wider they look than regular vehicle tracks. The other thing that identifies them is the fact that they have completely disturbed all the native rock. You can most easily see them in areas where there's desert pavement or areas like this where it's darker colored rock with light sand underneath. They usually just go straight across the desert. They were ordered to not use established roads, whether they were paved or unpaved. The soldiers from World War II were training here. There was a large camp, over 1 million soldiers were here, and I will do quite a number of future videos on the topic. I know where a lot of the campsites were. I see power line towers, and that signals my next turn. Much of the trail follows existing either gas line, power line, or other utility routes, which are necessary to maintain those infrastructure items, and so they are not readily closable. Now, a little bit of a downside, since you're looking at power lines or gas lines, but I guess it's a bit of a trade-off. And here we have another EMHT direction sign saying go to the right, and off you go to the right. There's an airstrip here, and I don't know a lot about its history, but it looks like it was either a part of the Desert Training Center as an emergency airstrip, or more likely because there was a Metropolitan Water District camp, maintenance camp for the power line here a long time ago. That was probably for it, but it looks like it's still maintained. The windsock is still visible there. So you can see it just next to the road. It's called the Camino Airstrip, and about a half mile up ahead, maybe a little more, is where the camp was. It will stop there. So we're back in civilization. We got power line, transformer station, whatever they call it here. And this was also the site of a
Metropolitan Water District maintenance camp or construction camp. And there's a water tower over there remaining from those days. That's almost missed the turn. These pretty desert flowers are poisonous, so don't touch. It's called Sacred Datura or Jimson weed. Here's the unopened flowers and the thistles. This section of road is very smooth, and I can get it up to about 30 miles an hour or so. On rougher sections, it's probably 10 to 15, maybe up to 20. But generally you want to keep it kind of slow. Most of the trail runs through habitat for the desert tortoise. And one of the biggest causes of mortality for the desert tortoise is being run over. So you want to keep an eye out for desert tortoise in the roadway. Don't pick them up unless it's absolutely necessary, and any higher than necessary. And move them only far enough to get them safely off the road in the direction that they were going. This is the empty shell of what I think is a coyote melon. And I ran over it, so I broke it up. But these grow out here in the desert, and not sure what they're good for, but see if I can find out. Like they're all broken open, so something is using it as a food source, maybe, and hollow. And I think this is the plant from which they came. This is very soft sand on this track. Another gas line road. And it goes straight ahead up through the pass and the low mountain range ahead. They have smoke trees on the left and a lot of creosote bushes on the right. The guide says that low range is required from here up through the pass. Let's see how it goes. Doesn't look that bad to begin with. We'll see what we get into. It's loose and rocky, so it's well advised to put it in low range, at least for this hill climb. step. Middle. Well, I need to go all the way up to the top, I think. I don't want to stop. It's running, maybe. See, the gas pipeline road runs off Arrow Strait to the pass in the mountains ahead, and we are about to turn off. We are entering the town of Goffs, a former railroad town, mining center, and well, primarily railroad and homesteading, I guess. There are very few permanent residents here, and most of what's here is the museum at the old Goffs schoolhouse. And so I will do a future video with more information about that.
Okay.
There was also some history with Patton's Desert Training Center. As stated, Goffs was a railroad town, and it lies at the top of a hill. So the trains are climbing from both directions. There's 3 tracks. One is a siding, and 2 main lines. Double track to go so the trains can travel in both directions. It looks like this was an old lunchroom or cafe. Somewhere around 15 years ago, the Goffs store burned to the ground. I don't know what the cause was, and I don't know exactly when it was, but I think the first time I came through here, it was still around.
Goffs was also founded in 1883 with the construction of the railroad. It became an important town when the Nevada Southern Railroad built a short line north to Barnwell in 1893. By 1911, there were enough families in town to justify a school. The schoolhouse was built in 1914. The National Old Trails Road passed through Goffs beginning in 1912. In 1926, it was designated as U.S. Route 66 and passed through the property that the schoolhouse rests on. Route 66 was aligned away from Goffs in late 1931, and the town slowly died.
Just past Goffs, we enter the Mojave National Preserve. But not too bad. Here in the Mojave, in the summertime, thunderstorms come through and change the landscape. Things flood, roads get washed away, paved roads get washed out, and sometimes they become impassable. Last year, Hurricane Hillary and some monsoons around the same time closed a lot of roads in the preserve. I was actually going to drive the trail last year at this time, but decided not to because of the closed roads and a wildfire that happened just before. So we don't know what we're getting into.
Gold was discovered here in 1883. The mining district was called Exchequer, later renamed to the Signal District. Originally called the Cashier Mine, this mine produced ore assayed at $25 per ton in gold and $75 per ton in silver. It was renamed the Liza Ray Mine in 1908 when another company took over. Vanadium and tungsten were discovered at this and a nearby mine in 1911, creating another boom. That boom was short-lived and the mine soon closed. It was reactivated in 1936 and 1937 before closing for good. The mill was probably torn down during World War II.
We are entering the AT&T utility service road. There was an underground telephone cable operated by AT&T. It was constructed in 1964 by the federal government as a defense measure. The idea being that in case of nuclear war, this communications link would exist from coast to coast. It consists of 12 tubes buried about 3.5 to 4 feet deep, repeated every 4 miles. It had 18,000 circuits. These rock cairns mark the Mojave Road. They're placed all along the route. I believe they're on the north side of the road, or right-hand side heading westbound. And they are an established way of marking trails. So these are ones you don't want to tear down. I know that rock stacking has become a thing, and tearing down rock stacks have become a thing, but these are some that you do not want to remove or damage. The EMHT does not have cairns to mark it, so the guidebook is a mile-by-mile explanation of the route, and it goes into great detail as you cross different reference points like washes and crossroads and things of that nature. Well, I discovered a little bit of a problem when I stopped to photograph the cairn. So I have a trailer plug and a separate Anderson plug to charge the battery from the alternator on the tow vehicle. And just now, I found the tow vehicle side dragging in the dirt. And the worst part about this one was the positive lead had been pulled out, and the positive lead of the connector had been pulled out, and the spring was out of place. Thankfully, it was still there, but it was out of place. So I just got the trailer power plug repaired. Hopefully it will stay repaired, but that would have been a serious problem. And I know some people are saying serious problem, but I've got no cooler, no ice, only fresh food, and the only way to charge the battery on the trailer, which powers the refrigerator, is to charge it from the tow vehicle, from the Lexus. And if that doesn't work, then it will go flat, because I do have solar panels, but they're not mounted on the roof. They'll only work when I'm stationary. Climbing up the cable access road. And it's very rough and rocky and washed out in places. So far, not difficult. Be interesting to see where it was repaired. The AT&T cable road coincides with Mojave Road, and we will be on the Mojave Road for about 20 some miles, I think. I think that relatively straight line with a berm on it, in some places 2 berms, is probably where the cable ran. And it extends down through the wash and out into the desert.
During the Cold War, the government decided they needed to bury a telephone cable all the way across the country so that as we are dying from radiation poisoning, as Dennis Casebier said, we can communicate with each other. So these sheds were built, and it was about every 4 miles above the cable, which was only 4 feet down. Inside then were a number of measuring devices, test devices. This hatch right here was an access point. There was like a cement vault underground, and that way the technicians could check on the condition of the cable every so often. And after the Cold War, it was decided that they would remove the cable and tear down all the sheds. And Dennis Casebier was talking to BLM, who had some oversight on this shed removal, and managed to acquire 2 of the sheds for Goffs.
This was all washed out. They filled it in with rocks and dirt. Mostly rocks, big rocks, from what I saw. And the downhill side. This is where it's worst. This whole gully was washed out and now refilled back in. This is the Paiute Range.
Cattle ranching started in the eastern Mojave around 1882. The key to successfully running cattle was the water sources. Springs were developed to provide the cattle water. At that time, few people lived in the area. Gradually, miners and railroad employees moved in. The ranchers shared their water, and the miners and the communities along the railroad became a market for the beef.
This is the Paiute Corral, a historic ranching structure. Construction's kind of interesting with old railroad ties and posts held together with pipe.
Around 1910, homesteaders moved in, and there was some friction between them and the ranchers. Eventually, most homesteaders moved away, but the ranching continued into the early 1990s, when the Desert Protection Act created many wilderness areas, along with the Mojave National Preserve. That ended ranching for good.
A wall to funnel them into the opening. So here we have one of those Mylar balloons. I'm going to go ahead and pick it up and take it with me. From what I understand, the bighorn sheep and probably other animals tend to eat them, and it's not good for them. So I will pick them up every time I see them.
My campsite for the evening is the site of the old Mojave Road school bus. For 35 years, the old bus sat on private land and became a landmark for travelers on the Mojave Road. It was a target for shooters and vandals who tipped it over on its roof at one point. In 2018, it was moved away and eventually made its way to the MDHCA Goffs campus, where it is displayed today.
The end of my ice. The beverages. Bullet bourbon.
I will see you next time. Meanwhile, get outside and take a dirt trip.